Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Good evening, sir.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And the voice you can hear is Mr. John Leonard. And welcome all to another edition of Book Corner Extra Time, where I link up with authors that have been in my book corner as Book of the Month. And for April, salute the inside story of England's own goal at Berlin's Olympia Stadion was Book of the Month, and we finally caught up with each other to talk about that. But John, as always, before we get into the nuts and bolts of your book, let's have a little bit about you and your backstory.
Well, I was been a journalist for 40 years. I'm basically in semi-retirement now, and I worked at. I began in local newspapers in Staffordshire. I'm from Stoke-on-Trent. I'm a Stoke City fan. That's for my sins. That's my club. And I was very keen on sport as a kid. I was, especially athletics, I was reasonably good at that. County standard, represented the Midlands in a couple of races as well. In the days when athletics was strictly amateur, so as a middle distance runner. And in terms of career, I worked, as I say, I started out in local papers, then went to the BBC, was there for about 5 or 6 years. I was 3 years in Newsnight, which was very enjoyable at the time. But to be honest, the BBC for whatever reason didn't suit me, and there was quite a few people at Newsnight leaving to RTN, including the boss of Newsnight at the time. And he invited me over to RTN, and that's where I was for most of my career, and as a news journalist. But also I did quite a lot of sport as well there. In fact, I did quite a bit of sport at Newsnight as well. We had a very eclectic brand there in the mid-'80s, which wasn't quite appreciated by the bosses, but that's another story.
You've had a fantastic career. You've also had a tremendous career in writing books, and we've hooked up twice before with your book about Neil Franklin and your book about Tony Waddington, director of the Working Man's Ballet. Yeah,
well, I suppose with Waddo, it was a labour of love as much as anything else, and I was a bit frustrated that nobody actually bothered to write anything from a journalistic point of view. Obviously, Alan Hudson had done his love, as it was a book. It was fantastic, and did that. So I thought that story needed telling. Also, I felt, because I was so pushed into it, even when I was writing the Waddo autobiography, or biography rather, I was pushed by friends who were Stoke fans to do Neil Franklin, because he was such a hero to their dads and all the rest of it. And frankly, I didn't think that story had been told basically at all, and certainly not told properly. So I'm glad I did it. I was especially glad because got to be honest, it wasn't a great seller, and even the Waddo book is selling better now than residual copies than Neil Franklin. But it did get the appreciation of my peers. I did get nomination for the Sports Book Awards 3 years ago now, in 2021, and I was launched for that, which to get the critical acclaim was very nice indeed.
You mention that it's a labour of love, and writing books is a labour of love. When you're writing books about players, events, managers, etc., of many years ago, it doesn't really sit with the modern football fan and of the here and now. It sits very pleasantly with me and the older football fans, and to get those accolades from your peers is greater, in my opinion, than any well done, John, from a Johnny come lately that doesn't really understand what football was like back in our day.
I think it's frustration because
Yeah, it is.
I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Insta, and all the rest of it. And with this book, I kept sort of like copying stuff. I was getting it back in March, April, and the book hadn't come out. Nobody had read it. And the interesting thing is, the football fans give an opinion, but football fans give an opinion through their own politics, and that's the thing. The
Yeah.
whole thing is about sport and politics, and it's both from particularly the far left and the far right of politics. Because you go through their threads, you just see some awful stuff, and you're thinking. I responded thinking, well, why are you coming back to me? And actually, more generally, I think, I mean, it's very frustrating. I mean, in a I mean, I would like to make it timeless, but in an election campaign, for example, I see stuff from all sides. I see people commenting on it. I'm just thinking, well, hang on a minute, mate. You haven't a clue what you're talking about. You know, it's just it's just bonkers. But
Yeah.
that it's not just football, as I say, or sport in general. It's in a broader context, and this is a particularly important year with the Euros and then the Olympics. And one of the reasons for writing Salute was because I had seen a few years ago. I did a book called Fair Game for Pitch Publishing, which came out about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. I did little snapshots of various incidents of sports and politics that I highlighted. It's always a bit personal because you know I'm from an Irish background, so I did a bit of stuff on Gaelic Athletic Association, but mostly on football, athletics, boxing, and a bit of baseball too, with the Jackie Robinson story, and also rugby. And what I realised is that in Salute and this incident in 1938, I read so much rubbish about it. People getting things wrong and people doing this, that, and the other. And I went to the publisher. I thought, can I actually expand on just that one chapter and do far more on it? So that was the inspiration for doing the book.
How long did it take? Because I cut the Pitch Publishing through yourself have kindly sent me a copy. There's a wonderful picture on the front. The only front cover that you really could run with is that iconic own goal with the Nazi salute. The book is a fantastic publication, and it doesn't just border on that or hone in on that. It takes you back to a time where football really began and gives you the background and really does give you the inside story to that football match.
Yeah, it took me. I started writing it in lockdown.
Mm.
It was, and that sort of, well, it was 3 years ago that it finished. And I pitched it at the beginning of last year, 2022, January 2022. And the publishers said, right, okay, we're interested, we'll do it in the spring of this year, 2024. And so it did take time, but it also takes time because I was determined to go through all the news clippings I could find, either online or go to the British Library, go through the papers there. There are a few papers, the Daily Express and the Henry Rose take on that. Henry Rose, as you'll know, maybe our older listeners will know, was the Diwan of sports writers in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and sadly lost his life in the Munich disaster. And at his funeral, there was many people turned out for his funeral in Manchester, as there were for the players who sadly lost their lives. And quite extraordinary. So it was important to go through the newspaper cuttings, but also go to Kew, go to the National Archive, and go to the papers. And I've got to be honest, there were certain papers in 1935, and the archivist was quite strict with me. He said, "You got to stay here. You can't take this paper. You can't take these papers out of here." They put me in a separate room. Now, and when I opened the file, my eyes popped because I couldn't quite believe what I was reading. And she said, "You can take photographs of the papers and that." And so I did. And it was the same very much for 1938 because, again, I went to the National Archive. A little bit for the Olympics. The Olympics wasn't too difficult because of the 2012 games. A lot of the stuff, and if anybody wants to look at the background to the Olympics, especially the 36 games, a lot of that's online because it was made available for the 2012 Olympics in London. And so, yeah, in many ways, the research, I joked to friends with family. That's the most enjoyable bit, getting it all back and writing it all up. Well, I do enjoy writing, as you know, but that was more of the hard work, as it were, to actually put together a narrative, and something that people hopefully will inform people, but also enjoy as well.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of historic content. It does talk about the dawning age of football in this country, and how the rest of Europe perceived England. I mean, there's one chapter there, Germany's English disease. Masters of World Football is your first chapter. England really did keep banging the drum about how we invented the game, how we were the masters of it, and it seemed to really rub the Europeans' noses in it. And I think from that day we've never really recovered, have we, in terms of our arrogance?
I know. It's one of the curious things because, in a sense, our nearest friends in terms of England, I talked about my Irish background, but I know in Ireland, and also in Scotland and Wales, I mean, you'll know it as well, is that crying out loud, it does get up their noses, the English arrogance. 30 years of hurt back in Euro 96 and all the rest of it, that's still going on. And, 3 years ago, that unfortunate final at Wembley, unfortunate for lots of reasons, off the field as much as on the field. But the curious thing I found is that there was still, amongst many other European countries, still a grudging admiration. I mean, the Italians, along with Austria, probably the most powerful teams, best teams in Europe at the time. I know that's highly arguable, but better than England. England were very poor in the 1930s. Scotland were probably arguably a better team than the England team. But the Italians, I can't remember what the Italian phrase is. I mean, but the fathers of football, that's how they describe it very poetically. As English, it's the fathers of Calcio, as they call football. It's and the Germans too. Curiously, I did think about this because I thought, well, people know about the Germans, but I thought it was important to, from a sporting context, as much as a football context, to look at the development of German football, which came later, and for which they owed a lot to England, and they were quite happy to acknowledge it. Their clubs named after Victoria Berlin, for example, which is fairly obvious connotations there. And they also love rugby. I think something that I discovered, which I'm quite a big rugby fan. I played as a kid very badly as a seventh and all that, but I didn't believe that how strong the Germans were before the Second World War at rugby. I mean, they took on the French team quite regularly, and because there was a time in the 30s the French were kicked out of the Five Nations, as it was, because they were deemed to be professional. Germans were amateur in sport at every take, and this was nothing to do with just the totalitarian regime of the Nazis, but under both the Weimar Republic and also the Kaiser, they were still amateur. They kept that going right until the post-war years, until they were welcomed back into sport.
And you've alluded to the English within the German Football Federation, if you like, and the teachings of the English that's in there in Germany, and none better or more important than Jimmy Hogan. I mean, Jimmy was instrumental in teaching the whole of Europe, really, not to sing but to play football. And with his good mate Hugo Meisel, they pretty much covered all of Europe, didn't they, in a coaching capacity?
Yeah, they did. Hogan was a curious character. He had an injury-ridden career. I think he was at Burnley. He was Lancashire lad.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Yeah, from an Irish family, and curiously out there, he described himself as Irish rather than English, just maybe to give himself an easier time, because his command of German wasn't great. I suspect it was better than some people made out at the time. Because he spent a lot of time in Austria, especially in Hungary. Ferenc Puskás adored him, and I've written in my research. I read one or two biographies. They were quite carping about Hogan, but there was no doubt he was a great coach. He was a great coach at Villa. He got them promoted in the 30s, and that's why they went to Berlin in 1938. And as I said, if Ferenc Puskás, we'll call him uncle or what, I can't remember quite the terms he used.
Basky.
Yeah, but
Basky's uncle, isn't it? Uncle Jimmy,
yeah.
They used to call him.
Uncle Jimmy.
Yeah,
that's right. And I go back to what you were saying earlier about modern fans of football and then delving into it. Thinking, hang on a minute, mate. One of the greatest players to have actually stepped onto a football field, described him, as you say, as Uncle Jimmy. Yeah. There's no better endorsement, really, in my view. But maybe I am a bit old-fashioned in that view. But it's a great compliment to the man. And it's say with Hugo Marshall, who was the founder of the Austrian Wonder Team, I don't want to say a football genius, but near on it. I do actually. Actually, acknowledged in the book that he was described by many as a genius, as a coaching genius for his time.
Between the two of them, they were genius. Probably the forerunners to a modern day Clough and Taylor. I don't know what the dynamics between Meisel and Hogan were, but they were a match made in heaven. In fact, the match that was the World Cup final in 1974 was between Holland and Germany, well, West Germany as it was then, and it was pretty much the Jimmy Hogan final, wasn't it? I do believe that the secretary of the German Federation wrote to Jimmy's son and told him all about how his dad was pretty much the father of German football.
Yeah, well, he was. He coached. He actually coached the Netherlands as well.
Yeah, he did.
As well as in Germany, and he was quite a fascinating character, a feisty character, as he proved in 1938 when Villa played the day after England played Germany in that infamous match. But he also he had his troubles. He was basically held under house arrest during the First World War, the Great War as it was known then. His family were also held but released to go back to England, as he did eventually, but only after the war. And curiously, before the war, one of the reasons why he was in Hungary at the time is because Marshall wanted him, and he wanted him as to help him coach the Austrian team at the 1960 Olympics, was due to be held in Germany, and he found out that the DFB, the German Football Association, wanted to interview Jimmy Hogan, and they set up an interview at the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, but and asked, rather naively, asked Marshall for a reference, and Marshall thought, well, I'm having none of that. I'm having Jimmy Hogan on my staff. He ain't going to Germany. So that was that.
But again, there was a lot of. There's a great book out there, Prophet or Traitor, about Jimmy Hogan, and he wasn't revered, was he, by the English Football Association? In fact, when England famously played Hungary in the '53 game, Jimmy was there, but he wasn't invited by either the English or the Hungarians.
Yeah, I think Puskás invited him. I think that's what it did do. I think it's a lot of dispute over that because he was there, as you say.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
And the older Hungarian players wanted him there too. So I don't think there was any argument at the time. So he did go, and I'm sure Puskás and his mates were more than delighted to see him.
Absolutely. Going back to Germany and the birth of of the, I suppose, the modern day Germany, you have to go back to its beginnings. You do reference in one of your chapters the rise of the Nazis. You focus upon Rome in 1933, and you do talk a lot about the Olympics. There's before the World Cup, it was pretty much the Olympic Games, wasn't it? And between the wars, of course, we had the Mitropa Cup as well.
That's right. Yeah, which was the kind of forerunner to the Euros we have
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
And the British teams didn't compete in that. But yeah, that was the forerunner. The Olympics, so as you mentioned, was the biggest thing. As an international sport, I argue that boxing is probably bigger than football. And anyway, it's still a massive sport now, obviously, but I think, the Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, it had that extra bit of edge. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, from America, against a man deemed as Hitler's pet. There's nothing of the sort, and naturally, the two fighters developed a great friendship. But the Olympics was key because prior to the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the Nazi takeover, Goebbels had identified the award of the Olympics to Germany as a bit of a plus. I mean, the irony is that the other contenders were Rome.
Yeah.
That was the strongest contender.
Yeah, it was Mussolini, wasn't it, really, that talked himself out of having that Olympics?
Yeah, because the Irish really didn't want him. He was seen as an autocrat. The King of Italy was still in charge nominally, but democracy had gone in Italy, and the Irish were wary of taking the sport to Rome. It did not stop, of course, Mussolini developing football, and the irony is there was no World Cup. Sorry, there was no football in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles. The Americans wouldn't have it there.
Yeah.
And so that was the Chancellor Jules Rimet. He went to Uruguay. He asked them to stage the first game. He even invited, even though they weren't a FIFA member, he invited England to go. They invited the Football Association. They rejected it. And then Mussolini grabbed his chance in 1934 and bankrolled, basically, the World Cup, because FIFA at the time is now a multi-billion-pound entity, as we all know. But at the time, it was skint. And so they took up the offer of an autocrat. It can't be argued that the FIFA, despite all the billions they earn from TV revenue and all the rest of it, as much in the hock to these sort of powers as there were then. The guitar, World Cup and all the rest of it, we can go into that, but it's related, but it's a kind of different story. So going back to your question, yes, the Olympics was massive, and I couldn't really write about England in the Olympia Stadium, which was built for those Olympics, and the propaganda, without linking, first of all, the game in 1935 at Tottenham, then the bridge at the
NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. If approved, applications are typically funded the next business day or sooner. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partner. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
At which many of the British establishment turned up, apart from members of the cabinet. But Lloyd George went, and probably the key constant amongst the British diplomatic circles was Sir Vansittart, who was a key mover and shaker in the Foreign Office amongst the civil service. He went to Berlin, and also he played a role both in 1935 in a game, and the match being staged at Tottenham, and also the infamous game in 1938 in the Olympia Stadium, where England made the Nazi salute.
Were they told? I mean, we don't really want to give. We've got to skirt around it, haven't we? Because we want people to buy the book. Whether
Yeah.
they were told or whether they just decided to. I mean, it's a half-hearted salute from the front cover, isn't it? It doesn't look as though it's a full-bodied. Let's give the salute here. You look at the body language of the players, and I think it's quite clear that they didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And in the photo section, I showed the German fans who were all paid up members of the Nazi Party, but 10,000 turned up. And you can see there the salute was meant. And also you can see it from on the back cover of the players coming out, Eddie Hapgood and the German captain leading their teams out, and the Hitler Youth giving the Nazi salute. So it was quite clear. I mean, putting it on the front was difficult because I had many discussions with the publisher because, as you say, you got to have it on the front cover, but I didn't really, because it can still cause, for obvious reasons, cause upset. And so just how to knock it out, but whether to knock it back or to try to, but you can't really doctor the image. It's there, it happened. So there's no glossing over that, unfortunately.
And the lovely thing as well, there's a story behind it as well, isn't it? That includes a tale of redemption. How one of England's players making that Nazi salute then rescued one of the fans watching him, a teenage German Jewish refugee. So there's a lovely little kind of backstory that works alongside this fantastic story of one of probably the darkest salute in English football's history.
I think that was remarkable. I came across it. The Times of Israel ran a story when Spurs were playing Maccabi Tel Aviv, and one of the journalists was married to the son of the refugee that was rescued by Bert Sproston. Bert at the time played for Leeds United, so I got in touch with the Times of Israel to find out more. Especially it's because they said he played for Spurs at the time. He didn't. He played for Leeds, and Leeds were not for the first time short of money and wanted to sell Bert. Spurs, who were a second division club at the time, and are still getting ridiculous crowds. I mean, you're thinking about what goes on now. Well, I suppose actually maybe I've been unfair. I mean, to follow a championship club, Stoke get decent crowds of 25,000-30,000, even though I remember as a kid, in the top flight they struggled to get that in the 60s and 70s. But Spurs were getting 40,000 crowds regularly. There wasn't much else to do that afternoon, to be fair. But he went there, he didn't settle. But in the meantime, he persevered with trying to get young Rolf Friedland, as his name was. He changed his name to Ralph Freeman when he joined the British Army during the Second World War. But he met young Ralph outside the Olympia Stadium after the game. And it does seem extraordinary with all the security and the Nazis would have put on. And Villa certainly suffered from that in their tour of Germany that year, that spring. But he managed to get hold of, any player would have done for him, for young Ralph, but he managed to get hold of Bert Sproston, gave him his details on a note. His English probably wasn't that good, but he was reasonably well educated, so he developed command. And Bert Sproston, to his credit, persevered and got him a game to England versus the rest of Europe in October of '38. And he came over, he got his visa. He's due to go back on November the 9th. That's the date of Crystal Night, the infamous Night of Glass, in which Jewish businesses were targeted by Nazis, Nazi sympathisers, Nazi party sympathisers, well, Nazis, the Gestapo, and everybody. And after that, Jewish businessmen rounded up. And so, of course, there's no way of going back. But he stayed in England. He got back in touch with Bert Sproston. And there's a friendship for life. And I'm glad to say that the family, Alan Freeman and his wife, Sue Serkis, they're still in touch with Bert. Bert's daughter-in-law, because unfortunately his son has passed away, but in Bolton, he ended up a British president. He was a trainer for after the Munich disaster, which I mentioned earlier. He was a trainer for Bolton Wanderers, and so that's where they lived. And it's a great story because they actually, I mean, there was this, as you say, this dark side to it. But British Preston, for himself and also for the team, I think, because he was a big friend with Stanley Matthews. Grew up in Sandbach, which is not far from Stoke-on-Trent, about 10, 20 miles away. They were big mates, and I think there's a redemption for them, as well as obviously saving a life. And the great thing was, as I say, the Sproston family and the Freeman family have kept in touch, and I think that's fantastic. Because sometimes in sports and politics it can be just a tale of depression, but this wasn't. This is quite inspiring, and I was glad to be able to put out that story as part of the book.
Absolutely. And the publishers, we've got to give a mention to the publishers. Again, it's Pitch Publishing that produce some fantastic work. And it's
Yes, indeed.
It's a lovely little book. It's a work of art. But after that episode, when England done the Nazi salute, pretty much it was the start of the Second World War, wasn't it? And that really kiboshed football. And football was played during the war years, but of course, a lot of the football players were out fighting against the Germans in the Second World War.
Yes, including not just England players. I mean, many of them were signed up. I mentioned that Stanley Matthews, in 39. In 39, they went to Italy and made the fascist salute again. But Stanley Matthews mentioned that many of his teammates had already joined the Territorial Army. They were already ready to go to war.
Yeah.
Matthews himself joined the RAF, as did so many. A lot of them were playing games for the entertainment of the crowds in various clubs. But some, as you say, did serve in combat. Johnny Carey, the Manchester United captain, he played for Ireland. Ireland in Browne in 1939 made the Nazi salute, again as a diplomatic faux pas, Carey being one of them, but he fought against the Nazis during the war, and he did see combat and survived, obviously. As did actually, I mentioned earlier, Rob Friedel and Freeman. He was wounded in action in Falaise, just north of Normandy, and saw action. And so there was this tragedy, but I think after the war, it was a case of trying to get football back up and running and all the rest of it. West Germany went on to win the World Cup in 1954, against Hungary and Puskas and all, and that was a bit controversial because of allegations.
Did they cheat their way to the victorious day of the miracle of Bern?
I think there's very strong evidence.
I think there is, yeah.
There was the players were doped, especially the second half.
Yeah.
The half time, as syringes were found outside the ground, and some of the German players did suffer horribly in later life. As well, I mean, the Soviets and the Soviet bloc and East Germans weren't the first, I think, to dope athletes. I think what happened in '54, the World Cup final against Hungary, there was the first evidence it was already taking place at an early stage. England, it might be a cup of tea at half time, maybe a bottle of whiskey. That was not the case with, unfortunately, the German team. Although, after they won the World Cup, of course, they did play England at Wembley, and the only surviving player, England beat West Germany in this game at Wembley. The only surviving player from the 1938 game was a certain Stanley Matthews. He was still going strong. And also, the only other survivor was Otto Nerz, who's the German manager in '38. He was interviewed by the Americans, quite a few, and the American forces decided he was not a Nazi sympathiser, and he went on post-war to have a great career as a football manager. And he was, in fairness, he was a great coach. I did a bit about the doping, whether he was responsible for that or somebody else is another matter. But certainly, as a football coach, And so he was a master of his art, and he was very generous in his praise to Stanley Matthews in the game in 1954, 16 years after the original game that Matthews was still playing, which is quite remarkable in itself.
I mean, that boy did have a very long career, didn't he? Both at Stoke City and for England. But in 1954, wasn't that the first year that Adidas got involved in making football boots?
Yes, it was. Yes, the two brothers. Yeah.
There was a little bit of Nazism as well surrounding Adidas, wasn't there, in those days?
Yeah, both brothers. One eventually founded Puma. They did fall out. But yes, they're all connected. There's one guy who stands out in my mind is Bruno Mallets, who was a propagandist for the DFB in the Nazi era and made some pretty horrible and racist comments. And yet he passed the vetting that the Americans did post-war of Nazi sympathisers, including those involved in sport, as Mallets obviously was. But Mallets was part of the organising committee for the Munich Olympics in 1972. It's quite extraordinary. It only emerged later about his Nazi sympathies. It's remarkable how these people managed to keep it quiet, but it happened, sadly. And the Munich Olympics have their own sad aftermath, although there were some remarkable sporting performances, not least of Mark Spitz, whose coach happened to be Zador, one of the Hungarian players who played in '56 in Montreal when the Olympics there. When there was a massive close up against the Soviet Union, it's called blood in the water the whole entire time. And it made international headlines. Hungary went on to win the gold medal, but Spitz's coach was one of those. Well, he was the Hungarian player whose image went all around the world at the time. So sport and politics, going back to earlier what I was saying, it goes on now. I think it's, unfortunately, sport is very much part of society. Well, no, not unfortunately. Unfortunately, it is part of society. And unfortunately, as a result, politics will enter the equation. It will, especially if there's national pride at stake, as it was with England's Masters of the World, and they want to be knocked off the perch. And it is now Olympics. I mean, it's great to see teams and athletes do well. But, as a kid, I remember Great Britain rather, getting 5 gold medals at best. Now, they get 15, 20 plus. And that's because of the money put into it. And that was a political decision from John Major back in the day. And I think the right decision. How the money is distributed, I think more of it should be distributed to grassroots. Small clubs that I know that you supported, football clubs and small rugby clubs or swimming or athletics and track and all the rest of it. I'm sure that argument will go on. It will go on for years to come.
Absolutely. But going back to the England and Germany, it is a great rivalry that started way back when. In fact, before international friendlies were really registered and recognised, Germany were playing England way before that, wasn't they?
Yes, I mean there was a dinner to celebrate the 25th anniversary of it was held by the DFB to the first time England played Germany. That was 1908.
Yeah.
And to this day, the FA do not recognise it as a game.
Yeah.
To this day, the DFB, modern Germany, still recognises it as the first Germany-England international. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's true. But the thing, I started the book about how it started. The England and Scotland game, the very first international fixture.
Yeah, that wasn't the first time, though.
Yeah, it wasn't the first time they played it.
No, not at all. No, I think they played many games before that.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible how they recognise something and then others don't recognise it. It's absolutely bonkers. For England in the early days, we did have the upper hand on the Germans in terms of games that are recorded and recognised by both nations. I think the first time Germany or West Germany beat England was before the 1970 World Cup finals, wasn't it? And I think Franz Beckenbauer scored the goal in a 1-0 win.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was that. I'm trying to think it was Euro '68, because the Euros in those. I mean, what I remember from a kid, apart from the World Cup final and apart from the quarterfinal in 1970, I mean, the game I remember the most is the one at Wembley in '72.
Yeah, I know.
And Banksy was playing with Stoke and Gunter Netzer. And what a player. He ran an absolute riot in that game.
Yeah, he did.
And West Germany won 3-1. And England, even up to that point, I think still I thought, well, we're the bee's knees. I mean, whatever happened with Hungary losing to 6-3 at that time, there was still a bit of arrogance about it. But and the second leg, I think, was in the Olympic Stadium, and there was 0-0.
Yeah.
But it was a big shock at the time. I remember watching TV. Netzer in particular was just he was a football genius, and obviously they had good ball. They had Franz Beckenbauer. England had decent players, but maybe also it's the time that Ramsey should have been ditching some of his World Cup winning players, but that's another matter altogether.
I mean, they had Gunter Netzer, as you've alluded to, one of my favourite German players, a maverick, a genius, and a legend. And we had their equivalent. We had Alan Hudson. And unfortunately, really, with Uddy and with Gunter Netzer, never really played the amount of games that they should have for both countries, because both countries really didn't look upon those players favourably, more so what they did off the pitch rather than on the pitch. But two peas of the same pod and two absolute world class performers. And Gunter didn't play, of course, in '75, although many English fans will still say Alan Hudson give Netzer a right run around in '75. And Alan and I just look at it and laugh because Gunter had retired after the '74 World Cup finals, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, I think Netzer was treated a little better than Alan Hudson. I mean, I'm a bit biased, as you know, as a Stoke fan, and my dad used to meet Alan quite a bit around. He lived in Boston, and he used to be look a bit. And Terry Conroy, my dad was Irish, and there was a connection there. And the good thing is about the team that Alan played against in '72. There's 5 players. There's still a strong friendship and bondable, so always great to see. But I think also there's immense respect for Alan too. Mick Petty might be an exception to that, but
yes, I agree.
Yeah, but even he would grudgingly admit that Alan was a superb player. And I don't find essentially fan of my era as a teenager who has got nothing but admiration for him. And to be fair, I think the later generations also treat Alan as it's not just a Chelsea legend, which he obviously was, but also as a Stoke legend too.
Absolutely. You alluded to not treating him very well. I would say that a dog with fleas was treated better than Alan Hudson was by the English FA and establishment. An absolute disgrace.
He wasn't the only one, though.
No, he wasn't.
Lost Stanley Bowles, and we recently lost Rodney as well. But he was just these maverick players, as they were known, and Tony Curry, and there were so many in the '70s. And people wonder why England didn't get to a World Cup. Well, they weren't playing the best team, quite.
Well, exactly. And again, that's another story, isn't it? John, It's been a fantastic chat about this wonderful publication that you've written. Salute the inside story of England's own goal at Berlin's Olympia Stadion. What's next for Mr. John Leonard? What book are you going to write next, mate?
I'm not sure. I'm actually to the past. I've still got this. I pitched a GA book about the founders of Gaelic Athletics Association. Not well, the founders. The two guys who the main All Ireland trophies are named after: Liam McCarthy and Sam Maguire. So I'm still looking into that. I'm still researching that. I'm looking at other stuff. I mean, going back in the history and. I was at the baseball the other day, West Ham's ground, the Olympic Stadium, and my conclusion from that is not really suitable for football, a major sport, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But because it was put up, supposedly cost nearly £1 billion, but I don't know how that how they managed to spend £1 billion on it, because it's not really on a standard of, for example, the Twickenham, Wembley, Tottenham's new ground, the Emirates and Arsenal to just take it in. It's not the same standard as the Commonwealth Games Stadium in Manchester City now playing. So I was there and I was thinking, because I have looked into this in the past about the T20 World Cup going on, and starting with the USA Canada, it's the international sporting team fixture in any sport. And cricket was very strong in the United States. So I've got all the cuttings, I've got the tour details, I've got the rest of it. It's just a matter of researching more and maybe writing it up and pitching it. But again, it's looking back at history, but I think there's a more cheerful story to tell than my latest project. But I'm and also I looked at again, as I mentioned earlier, the Blood in the Water in Melbourne, which again there's not been much written about. And again, it goes back to my, as a journalist, as a news journalist and a sports journalist, my peculiar obsession with sports and politics, which I'm not the only one. There's plenty of others I know, fellow travellers. So no, I'll look into those, I'll research those. I don't think a book will come out for another couple of years. So, I'll enjoy myself in the meantime.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure again, sir, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your writings, and I look forward to the next masterpiece from Mr. John Leonard.
Well, thanks for your interest. Really, really grateful, Gabby. Thank you very much for that. It's good always to be in touch and talk sport in general, but also in particular to talk football. It's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Bye for now. Thanks for listening, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thanks. Bye.
Give them a gift they'll never forget, because they'll still have it years later. American Giant makes clothes that just keep getting better with age, like their iconic full-zip hoodie that's designed to last for decades. Because a gift they'll wear for years is a gift that keeps on giving. So be a gift-giving giant this holiday season at American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code GratefulAG23. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com. Code GratefulAG23.